What if the family you gave everything to, the children you raised, the wealth you built, the legacy you protected, turned their backs on you in your final years? What if, in your most vulnerable moment, the only person who stayed by your side wasn't family, but a stranger, with nothing to gain and everything to give? This is the story of Margaret Holloway, an elderly billionaire abandoned by her own blood, and Dr. David Cole, a humble black physician who treated her with dignity when the world, and even her family, forgot her. When Margaret passed away, her last will shock the world. She left her billion-dollar empire, not to her children or her greedy relatives, but to the man who had shown her genuine compassion in her darkest days. Tonight, we unravel a tale of betrayal, greed, love, and unexpected loyalty. Stay tuned till the end, because the twist in this story will leave you speechless. But before we dive in, please support my channel by hitting the like button, dropping a comment, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss powerful stories like this one. Now, let's begin. The Whitmore mansion sat on the highest hill in Fairfield, its white stone pillars towering like sentinels from another era. Once, the estate was alive with chatter, garden parties, holiday gatherings, charity galas, but now, the only sounds were the ticking of an antique grandfather clock and the echo of a lonely woman's footsteps. Eleanor Whitmore, age 84, wandered her library that evening with a wool shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. She ran her thin fingers across rows of leather-bound books, most of them unread in decades. The dust reminded her of time, how it gathered quietly, suffocating everything if no one bothered to wipe it away. She paused before a painting of her late husband, Charles Whitmore, whose sharp jawline and confident eyes had once commanded entire boardrooms. "You wouldn't recognize them now, Charles," she whispered. "Andrew and Catherine, they don't even look at me anymore." Her voice broke, caught between grief and bitterness. She lowered herself into the velvet chair by the fireplace. The flames danced, but instead of warmth, she felt only emptiness. Her children hadn't visited in months. Birthdays were forgotten, her phone calls unanswered. When they did come, their words cut sharper than knives. "Mother, you need to think about transferring the estate. Do you really need all this space at your age? Money just sits here, Mother. Let us manage it." Not once did they ask how she was feeling, what she needed, or even if she was lonely. Eleanor had built a life of luxury for them. She had sacrificed time, health, and happiness to preserve the Whitmore name. Yet now she sat abandoned, like an outdated relic stored in an attic no one visited. That night, as the storm outside battered the mansion windows, Eleanor rose to fetch her reading glasses from her study. But halfway across the room, dizziness struck. The world tilted violently, and she crumpled to the marble floor. "Mrs. Whitmore!" gasped Maria, her loyal housekeeper, rushing in at the sound of the fall. Maria's hands shook as she dialed emergency services. Within minutes, the shriek of an ambulance cut through the night, and flashing lights illuminated the mansion's driveway. Eleanor drifted in and out of consciousness, catching glimpses of paramedics kneeling beside her. "Pulse is weak. BP is low. We need fluids now." Among them was Dr. Marcus Reed, a tall, broad-shouldered man with calm eyes that spoke of reassurance. Unlike the others, he leaned close to Eleanor, his voice steady but tender. "Mrs. Whitmore, can you hear me? You're going to be all right. Stay with me." Her faded blue eyes fluttered open. For the first time in months, she saw something she hadn't found in her children's faces: concern. Genuine, unselfish concern. When they lifted her onto the stretcher, Eleanor reached for Marcus's hand weakly. He held it without hesitation. That small gesture calmed her more than the oxygen mask on her face or the beeping machines around her. Hours later, after Eleanor was stabilized in the hospital, Marcus visited her room. His shift had technically ended, but something about her fragile loneliness tugged at him. "You gave us quite a scare," he said gently, pulling up a chair beside her bed. "I suppose. My body is as tired as my heart," Eleanor murmured, her voice raspy. Marcus tilted his head. "What do you mean by that?" She hesitated, then sighed. "I mean, doctor, my children don't visit me unless they want something. My phone doesn't ring. My house feels like a mausoleum. Tonight, when I fell, I thought, perhaps it would be easier not to wake up." Her confession weighed heavy in the sterile room. Marcus leaned forward, resting his hands on his knees. "Eleanor, you're not alone. Not while I'm here." The way he said it, firm yet compassionate, made Eleanor's throat tighten. She studied him for a moment. His skin was deep brown, his eyes steady and warm, so different from the cold, calculating expressions of Andrew and Catherine. "You remind me of how people used to look at me, before everything became about money." Marcus smiled faintly. "Money doesn't define you, Eleanor. Who you are, that matters more." She closed her eyes, a tear sliding down her cheek. For the first time in years, she felt seen, not as Eleanor Whitmore, the billionaire heiress, but simply as Eleanor, a human being aching for kindness. When Marcus finally stood to leave, Eleanor whispered, "Thank you for seeing me." The morning sun filtered weakly through the curtains of Eleanor's hospital room. Machines hummed softly, and the smell of antiseptic clung to the air. Eleanor lay propped up against a pile of pillows, staring at the sterile white ceiling. Her body ached, but it was the weight on her heart that hurt most. She heard the door creak open. Expecting a nurse, she was surprised when a familiar voice greeted her instead. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitmore. How are you feeling today?" It was Dr. Marcus Reed, still in his crisp white coat, a stethoscope slung loosely around his neck. He wasn't assigned to her case anymore. His shift had ended hours ago, but he had chosen to stop by. Eleanor blinked at him. "You came back." "I did," he said with a smile. "Wanted to make sure my favorite patient made it through the night." A faint laugh escaped her lips, one she hadn't heard from herself in years. "I doubt I'm your favorite." "Well," Marcus replied, pulling up a chair, "you're the only one who made me sit by a fireplace at 2 in the morning while listening to stories about 1950s charity galas. That makes you memorable." Eleanor chuckled, her frail shoulders shaking slightly. The sound startled even her, like music forgotten in an old instrument suddenly playing again. For the next half hour, Marcus checked her vitals, adjusted her and ensured she was comfortable. But unlike the other doctors who swept in and out with clinical efficiency, Marcus lingered. He asked about her favorite books, her travels, even the roses she mentioned from her garden. "No one's asked me about those roses in I can't even remember how long," Eleanor said softly. "Then they've been missing out," Marcus replied. "You should tell me about them. What color are they?" Her pale blue eyes lit faintly. Deep crimson, almost black at the edges. "Charles, my husband, planted them for me when we married. Every spring, they bloom like they're still trying to keep a promise." Marcus listened, nodding as though each word carried weight. He didn't interrupt, didn't glance at his watch, didn't rush her. For Eleanor, that attention felt like oxygen in a room she hadn't realized she'd been suffocating in. When his pager buzzed, Marcus sighed. "Duty calls. But I'll check in again later, if you don't mind." Her frail hand reached out, brushing his sleeve. "Dr. Reed, you don't have to." "I know," he said, smiling warmly. "That's why I will." That evening, Eleanor's children finally appeared. Catherine entered first, her designer heels clicking against the tile. Andrew followed, phone glued to his ear, barely acknowledging his mother. "Mother," Catherine said briskly, kissing the air near Eleanor's cheek. "You scared us. You should have told someone you weren't feeling well." Eleanor stared at her daughter, hurt flickering across her features. "I did. I called last week. You didn't pick up." Catherine's face hardened. "I was busy. Andrew and I have meetings, responsibilities. You can't expect us to drop everything." Andrew ended his call with a sharp sigh. "Mother, maybe this is a sign you should start transferring your assets. Managing the estate is stressful. You need rest." Their words pricked at her like needles. Not once had they asked how she felt. Not once had they asked if she was lonely, if she was frightened, if she wanted company. Before Eleanor could reply, Marcus re-entered the room to check on her. Catherine's eyes flicked over him with thinly veiled disdain. "And you are?" she asked coolly. "Dr. Marcus Reed," he said, extending his hand. "Your mother's attending physician last night." Andrew didn't shake it. "Is this really necessary? She's stable now." Marcus didn't flinch. "Her vitals are stable, yes. But she still needs care and company. Loneliness can be as dangerous as illness at her age." The siblings exchanged a glance, lips tight. Catherine muttered something about doctors meddling, then turned back to her phone. Eleanor's heart sank. They hadn't heard a word. But Marcus had. As he adjusted her blanket, his eyes met hers with quiet reassurance. That small kindness was enough to keep the tears from spilling down her cheeks. When her children left shortly after, Eleanor whispered to Marcus, "Thank you for seeing me, not just my money." And in that moment, a bond was formed, not of blood or inheritance, but of recognition. Eleanor Whitmore, the forgotten heiress, had finally been seen. 2 weeks passed after Eleanor's hospital stay. She returned to her mansion, but the place felt emptier than ever. The grand halls, the chandeliers, the rows of marble busts, none of it could fill the silence that wrapped around her like a shroud. Yet, unlike before, there was now a knock at her door that she looked forward to. "Morning, Mrs. Whitmore," Marcus greeted one Saturday, carrying a small basket of fruit and tea. He wasn't in his white coat this time, just a simple button-down shirt and slacks. Eleanor blinked in surprise. You came." "I said I would," he replied warmly. "Besides, hospitals don't allow me much time to just sit and talk. Thought I'd make it up to you here." Maria, the housekeeper, led him into the parlor. Eleanor sat by the fireplace, wrapped in her shawl. Her eyes softened as Marcus placed the basket on the table. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," he interrupted gently. "How are those roses doing? Still keeping their promise?" Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "They're blooming stronger than ever. I walked past them yesterday. Charles would be proud." For the next hour, they sipped tea and shared stories. Eleanor spoke of her travels in Paris, the opera nights she once hosted, the quiet afternoons reading on the balcony. Marcus listened intently, occasionally sharing anecdotes about his own family, a wife named Naomi, 2 children, a modest home filled with chaos and laughter. "You're fortunate," Eleanor said softly. "A family that wants you near." Marcus tilted his head. "And you're fortunate, too. You've built a life that still matters. People know the Whitmore name. But do they know me? She countered. Her voice trembled. My children, they see me as nothing but a vault waiting to be opened. I raised them, gave them everything, and now, her eyes glassed over. Now I am a stranger in their lives. Marcus reached across the table, resting his hand over hers. Eleanor, sometimes family is not who shares our blood, but who shares our time. You're not a stranger to me. Her breath caught, tears threatening. No one had spoken to her like that in decades. Word of Marcus's visits soon reached Andrew and Catherine. They stormed into the mansion one evening, their voices slicing through the halls. Mother, what's this about you entertaining a doctor in the house? Andrew barked. Eleanor stiffened in her chair. He's a friend. A friend. Catherine scoffed, crossing her arms. Mother, he's here for one thing, and we both know what that is. Your money. Don't be naive. Eleanor's voice was sharp, though fragile. He has never asked me for a dime. Unlike you. The siblings exchanged a look of outrage. Andrew leaned closer, his tone harsh. Do you have any idea how this looks? A Whitmore mingling with... He caught himself, but the disdain was obvious. With a doctor who saved my life. Eleanor cut in. With someone who visits me because he cares, not because of what he might inherit. The room fell silent. Catherine's jaw tightened. We'll see how long that lasts. When they left in anger, slamming the door behind them, Eleanor slumped into her chair, tears rolling silently. Marcus, who had arrived moments earlier and overheard part of the confrontation, stepped into the room. I'm sorry, Eleanor. I didn't mean to cause trouble. You didn't, she said firmly, wiping her tears. They did. Marcus, do you know what hurts most? It isn't that they want my money. It's that they don't want me. Her voice broke, and Marcus gently helped her stand. Come, he said softly. Let's walk to the garden. Fresh air always clears the heart. They strolled among the roses, their fragrance thick in the twilight air. Eleanor touched a bloom tenderly. Charles planted these when we began our life together. And now here I am, ending it with strangers for children. Marcus looked at her, his tone resolute. Then let them be strangers. You're not alone anymore, Eleanor. You have me, and you have my family. We see you. She looked up at him, the evening light catching her tears. For the first time in years, Eleanor felt something stir in her chest, not loneliness, but hope. The Whitmore mansion hadn't seen so much traffic in years. Andrew and Catherine suddenly began dropping by, their sleek cars parked arrogantly in the circular driveway. From the outside, they looked like dutiful children finally paying attention to their mother. But inside those visits, Eleanor saw the truth. They came with files, contracts, and financial proposals. They came with half-smiles that didn't reach their eyes. They came not for her, but for what she could give them. One Thursday afternoon, Catherine spread a stack of papers across the dining table. Mother, this is the trust agreement we've drawn up. All we need is your signature, and it will transfer oversight of the estate to Andrew and me. That way, you don't have to worry about anything anymore. Eleanor adjusted her glasses, scanning the pages. Words like control, transfer, and irrevocable leapt at her. And what do I keep, Catherine? She asked slowly. Well, of course, you'll be taken care of, Catherine replied quickly, brushing a manicured hand through her hair. But honestly, Mother, you can't manage all this at your age. We're protecting you. Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line. Protecting me, or protecting your inheritance?" Andrew leaned back in his chair, irritation flashing across his face. "Mother, don't be difficult. You're old. It's time to hand over the reins before you make a mistake." His words struck her like a slap. Old. Difficult. That's what she had become to her own son. "I will think about it," Eleanor said firmly, pushing the papers back across the table. That night, Marcus visited after work, bringing soup his wife had made. He found Eleanor sitting silently in the parlor, staring into the fireplace. "You're quiet tonight," Marcus observed, setting the bowl on the coffee table. "They want me to sign everything over," she whispered. "My children. They say it's to protect me, but I know better. They want it all, now, not later." Marcus sat beside her. "And what do you want?" Eleanor looked at him, her eyes glassy. "I want to be seen as more than a walking vault. I want to matter, Marcus. Not for my money, not for my name. Just for me." Marcus reached for her hand. "Then don't give them what they want. Not until you're ready." Her voice trembled. "If I say no, they'll stop coming altogether." He held her gaze. "Eleanor, let me ask you something. When they do come, do you feel loved?" She swallowed hard. "No." "Then you're not losing anything by saying no. You can't lose what you never had." Her shoulders shook as tears finally broke free. She turned her face away, ashamed of her own vulnerability. But Marcus didn't look at her with pity. He looked at her with something her own children hadn't shown her in years: respect. The next time Andrew and Catherine arrived, Eleanor was ready. "Mother," Andrew began briskly, "have you signed the documents?" "No," Eleanor said calmly. Catherine's eyes narrowed. "Why not?" "Because I am still capable of deciding what happens to what your father and I built. And because," she straightened in her chair, her frail body radiating quiet authority, "I will not be bullied in my own home." Andrew slammed his hand on the table. "Bullied? We're trying to help you." Eleanor's eyes flashed. "Help me? By ignoring my calls? By visiting only when you need my signature? By treating me as though I'm already gone?" Catherine's mouth fell open, but no words came. "I am still alive," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the tears gathering in her eyes. "And I will not spend my last years being stripped of my dignity by my own children." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Andrew finally muttered something under his breath, then stormed out. Catherine followed, her heels clicking like gunshots down the marble hallway. Eleanor's hands shook as she lowered herself back into her chair. Alone again. But this time, the loneliness felt less like defeat and more like defiance. Later that evening, when Marcus visited, Eleanor told him what had happened. He listened quietly, then nodded. "You stood your ground," he said. "That's not weakness, Eleanor. That's strength." She looked at him, a strange calm settling over her. "Marcus, if my own children don't want me, then perhaps I need to decide who truly does." And in that moment, the seed of a decision began to take root in her heart. Spring arrived, and with it, the Whitmore Gardens awakened. Crimson roses bloomed along the stone paths, tulips lined the walkways, and cherry blossoms flurried gently against the blue sky. Yet, despite the beauty surrounding her, Eleanor often sat on her balcony with a heavy sigh. A mansion filled with flowers was still a mansion filled with silence. One Sunday afternoon, Marcus arrived in his old sedan, honking twice in the driveway. When Eleanor stepped onto the porch, he waved cheerfully. "Hope you're ready for an adventure." She raised an eyebrow. "At my age, An adventure usually means remembering where I left my spectacles." He chuckled. "Today it means dinner with my family." Naomi insisted. "The kids too." Eleanor blinked. "Your family?" "Oh, Marcus, I don't want to intrude." "You're not intruding," he said firmly. "You're invited. Come on, Eleanor. You deserve more than silence." With Maria's help, Eleanor settled into Marcus's car, her heart fluttering nervously. She hadn't been inside anyone's home in years. The Reed household was a modest two-story home with toys scattered across the yard and the smell of roast chicken drifting from the kitchen. Naomi Reed, a warm woman with kind eyes and natural grace, greeted Eleanor with open arms. "Mrs. Whitmore, we've heard so much about you. Welcome." Eleanor felt strangely shy. "Please, call me Eleanor." The Reed children, 12-year-old Daniel and 8-year-old Grace, bounded into the living room. "Grandma Ellie!" Grace shouted, wrapping her arms around Eleanor's waist as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Eleanor froze, stunned. No one had called her that since her own grandchildren were small, and now those grandchildren barely remembered her birthday. Slowly, her arms encircled the little girl. For the first time in years, she felt warmth seep into her chest. At dinner, laughter filled the room. Daniel recounted a school project about planets, Grace made everyone giggle with her silly impressions, and Naomi teased Marcus about burning toast that morning. The conversation moved like a dance, easy, unforced, alive. Eleanor found herself joining in, telling the children about her travels to Italy and how she once got lost in Venice because she confused Ponte Vecchio with Ponte Nuovo. The children listened, eyes wide with wonder. "You've been to Italy?" Daniel asked, mouth agape. "Many times," Eleanor said with a smile. "Perhaps one day I'll tell you about the opera in Verona. It's like stepping into another world." Naomi reached across the table and squeezed Eleanor's hand. "You're welcome here any time. This house is always open to you." Eleanor swallowed hard, blinking back tears. "Thank you. I can't remember the last time I felt so at home." Weeks turned into months, and Eleanor became a regular presence in the Reed household. Grace would run into her arms shouting, "Grandma Ellie's here," whenever she arrived. Daniel proudly showed her his science experiments. Naomi often sat with her on the porch swing, talking about life, woman to woman, friend to friend. Eleanor hadn't realized how starved she was for family until she had one again. Back at the Whitmore mansion, she began moving through the halls differently. No longer did she shuffle like a ghost. She walked with purpose, humming softly, carrying gifts Grace had made or flowers Daniel had picked. Maria noticed the change and smiled knowingly. But not everyone was pleased. One evening, Andrew stopped by unannounced. He noticed the framed drawing Grace had given Eleanor, a crayon sketch of Grandma Ellie holding hands with two children. "What is this?" he demanded, his lip curling. Eleanor's eyes hardened. "It's love, Andrew. Something you wouldn't recognize." His face flushed with anger. "Mother, you're making a fool of yourself. These people are using you." "They've given me more kindness in months than you have in years," she replied coldly. Andrew stormed out, muttering curses under his breath. But Eleanor didn't waver. She returned to her chair by the fireplace, clutching Grace's drawing to her chest, a small smile touching her lips. That night, she wrote in her journal, "Blood may abandon you, but family is where love chooses to live. Today, I found mine." The air in the mahogany-paneled office was thick with tension. Sunlight slanted through half-closed blinds, falling across shelves of leather-bound law books and polished silver picture frames. At the head of the table sat Attorney Marshall Green, a seasoned man in his late 60s with sharp eyes that had seen too many families torn apart over money. He shuffled the thick envelope in his hands as he looked at the faces before him. On one side sat Dr. David Carter, calm but visibly uneasy, his hands folded in his lap. Next to him, his wife placed a gentle hand over his, sensing his discomfort. On the other side sat the Bennett family, people who had once filled the grand halls of Margaret Bennett's estate but had long since abandoned her in her years of need. Now, dressed in expensive suits and dripping with impatience, they leaned forward, eager for what they believed was rightfully theirs. "Thank you all for being here," Attorney Green began, his voice steady. "We are gathered to read the last will and testament of the late Mrs. Margaret Eleanor Bennett, who passed peacefully 3 weeks ago." A murmur ran through the room. One of Margaret's nephews scoffed, muttering under his breath, "Finally!" His sister elbowed him to be quiet. Green adjusted his glasses and continued. Mrs. Bennett was a woman of great wealth, yes, but also of deep principle. She made her intentions for her estate very clear. "I ask that you listen with respect." The family nodded, though their expressions betrayed thinly veiled greed. Green opened the envelope and unfolded the documents. His voice carried with authority. "To my family, children, nieces, nephews, and all who bear my name, I leave my forgiveness. But you left me long before my final days. You sought only what I could give, never who I was. Therefore, to each of you, I leave a token of remembrance, not wealth, but something to remind you of the love you could not return." Gasps filled the room. Faces twisted in confusion and outrage. Green read on. "To Dr. David Carter, who showed me dignity when others abandoned me, who saw me as a woman and not a bank account, I leave the entirety of my estate, valued at over $1 billion. May this gift not be a burden, but a tool to carry forward compassion, healing, and humanity, the very qualities you showed me when I had nothing but loneliness." The room exploded. "What?" shouted one of the nephews, slamming his fist on the table. "This is absurd!" cried Margaret's estranged daughter, her face red with fury. "He's not even family. This must be fraud," another cousin barked. But Dr. Carter sat frozen, his breath caught in his throat. His wife squeezed his hand tighter. Tears welled in his eyes as Green folded the papers. "This is the legally binding will of Mrs. Bennett," the attorney said firmly. "She signed it in my presence and in the presence of 2 witnesses. There will be no disputing its validity." The family erupted in protests, but Green raised his hand for silence. Mrs. Bennett made her choice. "It is final." Dr. Carter, still stunned, finally found his voice. It shook with emotion. "I never wanted her money," he said quietly. "I just wanted her to feel cared for, to not be alone." Green smiled faintly, nodding. "And that, Doctor, is why she chose you." The family stormed out one by one, muttering threats of lawsuits and betrayal. But as the heavy door shut behind them, silence returned to the room. Dr. Carter sat back, his mind racing. He had not just inherited wealth, he had inherited a responsibility. A legacy built not on greed, but on love and compassion. And in that moment, he realized Margaret's final lesson. True wealth lies not in money, but in the lives we touch. The day of the will's final declaration arrived. The mahogany-paneled courtroom was packed with journalists, curious townsfolk, and the very family that had once scorned Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore. They had come dressed in black, not out of grief, but out of strategy, hoping to convince the court that they had been the loving relatives wrongfully cut off. At the front sat Dr. David Carter, hands folded calmly on his lap, though his heart pounded. He never sought fortune, only to honor the woman who had believed in him when others mocked or doubted him. Behind him sat his wife, Angela, and their 2 children, quietly lending strength. The judge's voice carried through the silence. After reviewing all evidence, testimonies, and Mrs. Whitmore's handwritten statement, it is clear she was of sound mind when she altered her will. Her decision was made deliberately, as recognition of the loyalty, care, and compassion shown to her by Dr. Carter, a man who stood by her when even her own blood abandoned her. Gasps filled the room. Eleanor's family exchanged sharp glances, their carefully staged tears now drying. A few even stormed out in anger, muttering about betrayal and injustice. But the truth was unshakable. Dr. Carter bowed his head, his eyes stinging with gratitude and grief. He thought of the long afternoons he spent by Eleanor's bedside, not as a doctor, but as a friend, listening to her stories, hearing her regrets, and sharing in her laughter. She had lived her final years with dignity because someone still cared. The judge concluded. The Whitmore estate, in its entirety, is awarded to Dr. David Carter, as per the late Mrs. Whitmore's final will. The gavel struck, sealing Eleanor's last wish. Reporters swarmed outside, eager to spin the tale of the billionaire's shocking will. David, however, stepped forward with quiet humility. "I did not ask for this inheritance," he told them. "Mrs. Whitmore gave me something far more valuable than money, her trust. I will honor her by ensuring her fortune benefits lives, not destroys them." And he did. Within months, he established the Eleanor Foundation, funding scholarships for underprivileged students, building free community clinics, and donating to causes Eleanor had whispered about during her final days. Her legacy lived on, not in her estranged family's hands, but in the lives uplifted by her generosity. One crisp autumn afternoon, David returned to the gardens of the Whitmore estate. The leaves fell golden around the marble fountain where Eleanor once liked to sit. He laid a single white rose on the stone bench beside her plaque. "Thank you," he murmured, "for believing in me when no one else did." The wind rustled through the trees, as if Eleanor herself whispered back. Thus ended the story of a woman forgotten by her own family, yet remembered forever by the man who gave her dignity in her final years. Love, loyalty, and compassion, not blood, are what truly define family.